Hi, I'm Nat.
And I'm Guy.
And well, we will be talking in English, but the first 15 minutes of the live will be in Spanish, just because I have some things I want to talk about, especially surrounding Emilia Perez. So de ahora en adelante voy a empezar a hablar en español porque tengo varias cosas que decir sobre Emilia Pérez y todo lo que pasó con Carla Sofía Gascón, porque saqué un video el jueves y justamente había estado hablando sobre pues todo el desastre con la película en México y lo que pasó y las críticas reales que tiene la película. Hablamos de buen cine también, pero después, justo el día que ya estaba a punto, lo estaba editando y estaba a punto de sacarlo, se le ocurrió a Carla Sofía Gascón, ya tenía un problemita ahí con la actriz de la película brasileña I'm Still Here, o Sigo Aquí, no sé cómo se llama en español, pero salió a decir que creía que los fans de Fernanda Torres, que es la actriz de Sigo Aquí, la película brasileña, estaban atacando en su contra en Twitter y le estaban haciendo una campaña. Y pues varios pensaron que por reglas de los Óscares, pues eso no podía estar haciendo eso esta persona, saliendo a decir injustificadamente que había ataques en contra de su persona, pero decidió era chévere, pues tal vez alguien dice, Libigus dice que Carla Sofía antes era chévere, pues no sé, pero ahorita anda en el centro del huracán porque le empezaron a salir, los brasileños se enojaron y después no sé quién alguien empezó a encontrar muchos tweets que había hecho esta persona, no voy a usar pronombres, en su pasado. Y pues digamos que no era lo que la comunidad ni lo que nadie esperaba que esta persona estuviera diciendo, no solo como hace mucho tiempo, porque yo creo que todos los artistas y celebridades que se conocen tienen errores y cosas estúpidas que han dicho en su pasado, pero también recientemente, en especial sobre como lo que se les dice como las vacas sagradas en Estados Unidos, porque los mexicanos ya nos estábamos quejando de esta película, del director, también el director salió a decir, Jacques Audiard, que el español es un lenguaje para migrantes y para pobres y que por eso eligió hacerlo, pero como lo dijo en francés y en una entrevista con un periódico en Francia, entonces pensó que nadie se iba a enterar de lo que había dicho, pero ya México estaba muy enojado, nadie nos estaba haciendo caso, la academia y etcétera, Estados Unidos estaban como, bueno, pues no les gustó, pero chance, como cualquier otra película gringa, pues no les gustan las películas gringas. Pero luego salieron todos estos tweets que ni siquiera sé, o bueno, sí, pues tweets en su época, que ni siquiera sé si puedo leer en vivo, porque ya saben cómo se pone YouTube, pero básicamente se fue contra todos. Ya sea contra la religión de la media luna y todas esas personas, diciendo que hay demasiados de ellos en España. Se fue contra China, contra los chinos, se fue contra la academia misma, diciendo que parecía un festival de diversidad y que parecía un festival de cine afrocoreano, creo que para 2020 o 2021, cuando muchas películas de esas que están hechas para los Óscares ganaron. Entonces empezó este despapalle gigante con Carla Sofía Gascón. No voy a hacer el otro chistecito porque estamos en vivo, pero pues sí, le sacaron el peine, por así decirlo. Y lo que me da mucha risa y lo que quiero discutir en torno a todo esto es que la izquierda siempre se come a sí misma. O sea, en cuanto descubren algo que no va con sus morales y con lo que están diciendo en ese momento, entonces te destruyen a todo el mundo y pues se van comiendo los unos a los otros. Y toda la gente que seguía apoyando a esta persona y que decía que sí merecía el lugar de una mujer biológica dentro de los Óscares, pues empezaron a irse para el otro lado porque se fue contra George Floyd y todo lo que pasó. Varias de opiniones, las cuales pues empezaron a decir que tenía la retórica de la derecha y que era ultraderecha ahora, pero es una persona trans, pero ¿cómo puede ser? Entonces es un claro ejemplo de cómo por tener morales tan flexibles, por así decirlo, no hay fundamentos dentro de la ideología de los progres y de la izquierda. Entonces ahora pues salió que la persona que andaban alabando y tratando de hacer que fuera la primera mujer trans, persona trans en ganarse un Oscar, pues ya ahora la campaña es al revés, están tratando de hacer que no se lo gane. Y todo esto empezó porque Variety, que es un medio en Estados Unidos, decidió publicar todo esto y empezó a hacer más y más conversación en torno a esto en X, obviamente, pero en muchos otros lados. Y ahora ahora sí que ya todo el mundo está enojado con esta persona. Y salió esta persona, que se supone que lo quieren hacer la primera actriz trans en ganarse el Oscar, salió a llorar. Primero pidió perdón una vez, diciendo perdón si los ofendí, que eso pues para ellos es como si nos ofendiste y tienes que pedir perdón en serio. Luego salió a decir que perdón otra vez si los ofendí, voy a borrarlos, todo lo que había puesto, no hace 10, 20 años, lo había dicho hace 3, 4 años también, que contra todo lo que pasó en la pandemia, etcétera. Entonces, ahora sí estaba contra todo, se fue contra Adele, le dijeron gordofóbico también, o sea, todo lo que se pueden imaginar que les importa a los progres en Estados Unidos, esta persona está en contra de eso y lo había dejado muy claro en todos sus posts, pero salió a pedir perdón una vez, otra vez, borró su Twitter, bueno, su X, y después salió a volver a pedir perdón y ahora está otra vez, salió a llorar con CNN a decir que perdón y es que los ataques me están atacando una vez más. No sabe si va a renunciar a su Oscar, dice que es muy importante que personas como esta persona sigan en pie y tratando de ser visibles, pero pues creo que ya nadie quiere que esta persona sea visible por ningún lado. Entonces, por eso no había sacado video sobre esto, porque como que sigo esperando a ver si le van a quitar la nominación, si a Emilia Pérez le van a quitar algo. Obviamente creo que ahora sí no tiene ni tantita, bueno, puede que todavía le den algunos, como por las cosas técnicas, pero creo que ahora sí no tiene gran chance de ganar nada. Entonces como que todos los que estábamos hablando sobre este adefesio de película y de personas, Selena Gómez también llorando por mi gente que ni siquiera le entiende porque solo habla en inglés. Entonces todo esto ha salido a colación y por eso no había sacado otro video porque tampoco quiero saturar con puras cosas sobre Emilia Pérez. Y luego vamos a hablar más en vivo en inglés, o sea, después de que pasen estos primeros 10, 15 minutos que los quería hacer en español porque quería hablar sobre toda la controversia con Carla Sofía Gascón, sobre lo que está pasando en Estados Unidos, con los migrantes, con los aranceles, con Trump, con Sheinbaum, con todos ellos. Y también justamente hablando sobre el tema de Carla Sofía Gascón, quería saber si les interesaría que hiciera como una exploración un poco más a fondo sobre la comunidad trans, la comunidad alfabeto, etcétera. Y en especial porque salió, y les quiero recomendar, lo voy a dejar en la descripción en cuanto acabe está en vivo, pero les quiero recomendar una entrevista, bueno, no fue una entrevista, fue un debate entre dos personas trans, una de las cuales respeto mucho, que se llama Blair White, y otra persona que se llama, what's the name of that girl? Bueno, Blair White es en el canal de Polumbo, que todos ellos son miembros de la comunidad, y hablan en contra de toda la locura y el progresismo que ha infiltrado, todo el wokeismo que ha infiltrado su comunidad y cómo están tratando de salvarla. Y Blair White siempre ha dicho que es muy conservadora y aboca por que los trans de veras pues sean más visibilizados y que dejen de hacer todas esas estupideces, en especial con niños, etc. Entonces voy a dejar ese debate en Brianna, así se llama la otra persona. Voy a dejar ese debate en la descripción. Le pueden poner subtítulos en español, los autogenera, entonces no todo es como perfecto. Pero lo que dicen, en especial Blair, durante ese debate es justamente básicamente todo lo que yo opino y pienso sobre la comunidad trans, no que no deberían de existir, no que no hay algunas personas que realmente existen y viven así y que es que no sé lo que puedo decir en vivo y lo que no, pero que tiene que ver con la cabeza, más bien, si me entienden. Entonces, creo que es un debate que está llevando la conversación a un lugar más con sentido común, entonces lo voy a dejar en la descripción. Y aparte de eso, pues ya lo hablaremos en inglés, pero ver a todas las protestas en Estados Unidos y los mexicanos quemando banderas gringas, manifestándose no muy pasivamente, gente que se fue allá para buscar una mejor vida y ahora están gritando Viva México, pero al mismo tiempo están quemando banderas gringas y deciden quedarse allá. Entonces está todo muy confuso y tengo muchas opiniones y por eso vamos a hacer un video que va a salir mañana sobre todo esto, lo que está pasando con los aranceles, lo que está pasando justamente ahorita, acaba de pasar con Canadá también, todas estas decisiones que pasaron hoy, ya que se dijeran un poco entre hoy y mañana. Mañana en la noche probablemente voy a sacar un video sobre esto y tengo planeado para el jueves probablemente sacar un video sobre los mexicoamericanos, la falsa latinidad, los latinex, etcétera, porque está muy interesante justamente ahorita en torno a toda esta conversación que está pasando con las deportaciones, con la gente que vive allá, con lo legal y lo ilegal y qué quiere decir. Entonces, espero que lo vean, son mis opiniones reales, entonces espero que, si no estás de acuerdo, lo dejes en los comentarios de ese video, pero no tengo interés en andar como, bueno, ahorita en vivo sí, porque nos lo bajan, pero no quiero andar como nada más pisando así quedito, o sea, sí quiero irme a fondo con todo lo que pienso sobre esto. Entonces, ese video va a salir mañana en la noche probablemente, porque una vez más, entre Guy y yo somos los únicos que grabamos, editamos, hacemos la luz, el sonido, entonces a veces es lento, pero me quería esperar a ver qué pasaba hoy justamente con todo lo de los aranceles y con las deportaciones y lo que está haciendo la gente allá, bueno, en Estados Unidos principalmente. Y espero que hayan tenido un gran puente, porque si están en México, tuvimos un lunes extra de domingo. Entonces, ahora sí, ya ni sé cuánto tiempo llevo hablando, 12 minutos. Bueno, luego yo creo que cada en vivo voy a empezar con como 15 minutos en español al principio, yo luego irnos también con Guy en inglés. Pero muchas gracias por estar por acá. Si lo están viendo como replay o como ya grabado, entonces esperen el video mañana y les dejo abajo en la descripción ese debate entre estas dos personas trans, Blair White, a quien respeto mucho, y Brianna Wu, que se ha dado cuenta que toda esta locura que ella estaba apoyando, pues no era... O sea, que los que estábamos en contra de eso sí teníamos algunos puntos a favor. Yo diría todos los puntos a favor. Y bueno, eso es por ahora. Y ahora ya regresamos a los dos. And we're back.
Okay, so we're going to go into the English. Are we going into the English part of the podcast? Okay. So there's a lot of news. Rather than tell you everything that's coming up, I'm just going to go article to article here because there's so much Trump news every single day. He's just signing executive order after executive order, really tearing down the government. It's reminds me a lot of the Argentinian president. Javier Milei. So today was the big day for Mexico and Canada. The 25% tariff was supposed to come on. Mexico was the first to strike the deal, and that happened in the morning. She ended up making concessions, and it was the equivalent to, I think, Mexico agreeing to build the wall. I know that was a big joke in Trump's first term because he said he was going to make Mexico build the wall, and people joke about it now, but she made major concessions, which is going to cost Mexico a lot of money, but I think it saves them a lot of money in the end because there is no tariff, and that's huge.
At least for the next month.
Yeah, the concession, the major public concession she made was to send 10,000
National
Guard, not regular troops, National Guard troops to the U.S. border to stop the flow of drugs and human trafficking. In return, Trump also agreed to send troops to the border. He already had 2,500. I think he's thinking about sending another 10,000, so that would match the Mexican commitment. And what that's supposed to do is stop the influx of guns into Mexico. Scheinbaum, in negotiation talks, I'm sure, is saying there's no way they can do anything about the cartels as long as guns keep coming over into Mexico, and the major supplier of guns is from the U.S. So the fact that she was able to get that concession, and it shows they're working together, it shows that there's going to be big plans, and I would expect there to be some kind of war between the government and the cartels in Mexico sometime soon, especially because a large portion of the executive orders Trump did sign were relating to that. He signed 10 executive orders directly relating to fighting the cartels in Mexico.
The bad people organizations.
And then there's another 20 executive orders that support those 10, and he's going into legislation later on. In the next 90 days, legislation is going to be coming forth. So it's going to be very interesting what happens here in Mexico.
Yes.
Why don't you go into the Canadian tariff and talk about that?
Well, this hold on. Where am I?
There
well,
you go.
this essentially just happened, didn't it?
Yep.
So, hold on. I'm looking for the article.
Oh, you can go back to me. I can talk about it a little bit.
Sure.
Okay. So Trump later in the day, after Sheinbaum made the concession, the pressure was really on him. And I was hoping Trump didn't crack a deal with him because I really want to see Trudeau out of government. And the truth is, Canadian Parliament right now is frozen. There was a major corruption scandal that happened in Canada, so they're not able to actually do anything in Canada. So Trudeau's making promises to Trump right now that he actually can't keep until Parliament becomes unfrozen. But if he unfreezes it, they're going to have a snap election, which will result in the end of Trudeau. But the concession he made was he said he earmarked $1.3 billion to secure the border. The Canadian border is really not that big of a threat compared to the Mexican border, but the fact that he's earmarking $1.3 billion is a massive amount of money for Canada. And the fact that he can't actually do that through executive order is just showing he's lying to Trump. So this is another good point we have to make here. These aren't permanent deals he made with Sheinbaum or Trudeau. These are 30-day pauses on the tariffs. And then he's going to come back, see if they were able to accomplish what they did, and then he's probably going to ask for more. So I'm guessing he's slowly becoming the president of Mexico in a way, and they're slowly becoming the president of Mexico in Canada in a way. Every month he's going to ask for something else, I think. And he's
I think it's a way to handhold these other two governments into what the U.S. thinks is the better thing for the north of America.
It's extremely hard to get Trudeau to do anything that Trump wants because ideologically he's completely opposite than Trump. He wants open borders. He wants to allow massive Chinese migrants into the country. He wants to allow money laundering and drugs into the country. So Trump kind of has to force his hand through tariffs to do things. And in Mexico, Sheinbaum's between a rock and a hard place. She has people on bad side on one side of her, and then she has Trump on the other side. So if she can blame Trump for the reasons she has to take hard policies against the bad guys, that kind of lets her off the hook at least a little bit. So we'll see what happens.
Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, it is important to kind of make people understand that right now, exactly, Trudeau might have said in Canada, that he will comply and he will try to find a way to also protect the border, but the parliament right now is in recession. I know, but like people need to understand that that is impossible right now. And we will talk more about that in a video tomorrow in Spanish, but the fact that
he's making promises he can't keep.
And he's kind of keeping Mexico and Canada kind of away from each other during all of this.
Well, it was interesting, and I do want to say this because on the original NAFTA deal or the most recent NAFTA deal, Canada was trying to just make it between Canada and the U.S. The U.S. actually wanted to deal more with Mexico, so they went to Mexico, and Mexico kind of said, no, unless you include Canada, we're not so keen on the deal. So Mexico really forced Canada into the NAFTA deal, which really helped Canada out, which is the North American Free Trade Agreement. So it was very surprising when these 25% tariffs originally came up. Canada completely backstabbed Mexico, and it really talked down to Mexico, how it's a third world country, how Canada's better than it, how the United States and Canada need to have their own deal without Mexico. So then when Canada wasn't able to make that happen, they tried to play buddy-buddy and act like they didn't say any of that stuff about Mexico and try to involve Mexico in a trade war against the U.S.
And also, more recently, a lot of members of parliament, especially Doug Ford from Ontario, but a lot of them came out to say that they should do a unilateral, once again, like bringing back up the same thing. They should do unilateral trade with the U.S. and leave Mexico out of it, because they understand that what they're bringing to the table with regards to the U.S. and trade and et cetera isn't as significant as what Mexico brings for the U.S.
Well, and maybe let's talk about that for a minute, because a lot of people, if you look on paper, Canada and Mexico are almost exactly equal on the amount of GDP they bring into the U.S. They both bring control about 2.5% of the United States' gross domestic product. The issue is it's completely different, because Canada is a completely matured economy. The only way for them to really make any more gains is higher taxes. The quality of life for the people there is really going down right now. While Mexico is an emerging economy. So you are expecting, or a lot of people are expecting, Mexico's economy to explode over the next 10 years and do really well. So if the U.S. can get in on the ground level of that, there's going to be a lot of growth, not just for Mexico, but for the U.S. and U.S. corporations within Mexico. So I think Trump, because he's a businessman, really understands that and really favors Mexico a lot more than he does Canada. And the people of Mexico should really understand Trudeau and Canada do not have Mexico's best interest in heart. They've tried to backstab this country multiple times, and it's absolutely disgusting.
Okay.
It is.
Says the Canadian man.
Well, all I was watching for a week, it was parliamentarian after parliamentarian talking crap about Mexico and saying how Canada was so good and that Mexico's a third world country. Next thing you know, they want to play buddy-buddy.
Because they got scared.
Yeah, they got scared.
But I think one specific point that hasn't really been brought up and has been quite quiet is the 10% tariffs that Trump is also putting on China, and why they're keeping so quiet about this 10%, but then all the news and all the negotiations are happening between the 25% tariffs on both Mexico and Canada. But what about China? Yeah,
well, my whole thing was after he dropped the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and he kept talking about it and tweeting about it, so it was constantly making news headlines. And because they're both allies within the North American hemisphere, it was all over the Mexican, Canadian, and U.S. news, and it was just making international news headline after news headline. So he got concessions from both countries, but he could have got a lot more. I think the whole time the play was the 10% tariff on China. He couldn't put a big tariff on China to start with because he didn't want to scare them that there's a tariff war coming. And he also wanted to distract them with Mexico and Canada getting much higher tariffs. So they would kind of feel a little bit relieved that they're only getting 10%.
So the fact that he's being so, let's say, understanding or willing to kind of calm the waters with both Canada and the U.S., well, Canada and Mexico might mean that the whole China thing and the whole focus on that maybe should be a little bit more talked about, and why it is important to keep those or even grow them.
Yeah, I think there's a trade war. There's a trade war not only coming for China, but coming for other BRICS countries that aren't in the U.S.'s sphere of influence. I think Trump's really trying to create a closed economy here, and he's going around the world getting people to make concessions through the threat of tariffs. He's making people pick sides. He's also talked a lot about if the BRICS brings their own currency out, that he's going to put 100% tariff on them. Now, maybe it's just big talk, but you can see he's really trying to divide the world into two economies here: the BRICS economy and the U.S. North America, or the U.S. sphere of influence economy. Mm-hmm. And he's really trying to bring the U.S. dollar back. So,
I mean, another way you could look at it is that by kind of holding the hands up and helping Canada and Mexico along, maybe even eventually the rest of the American continent, they're trying to kind of put all their friendships and allies in good positions enough for themselves. So building their own countries' economies up, cleaning up their own countries as well, to help this pole of the world go against the other pole of the world, which is also why he might be trying to nationalize a bunch of different things and bring back manufacturing to the US, and why it might be also a good idea for Canada and Mexico to start looking at what do they need to be more of a self-sustaining entity, not relying on the US or other countries as much.
Well, he really scared Mexico and he really scared Canada with these tariffs. But the truth of the matter is he took down the tariffs and he got concessions, not only concessions, but you can really see this game plan emerging now of how he is trying to clean up Mexico and Canada. What do I mean by that? Canada, we lived there for a long time and there was no national pride. As soon as he started talking about a tariff, these liberals became extremely national, extremely patriotic, and really ideologically is getting in line with the U.S. and I think it's really strengthening the Canadian identity to start with. And I think there's going to be a lot of other things strengthened after that. It's also making these countries look at other ways to get taxes. So even though he took the tariff down on them, it's got to make them think, can they tariff other countries in order to bring an income in? The good thing about a tariff is if it brings taxes from other countries rather than its own citizens. Trump ultimately has talked about bringing tariffs in so he doesn't have to tax his citizens or his corporations. And that might be a good idea for other countries to bring a tax income in, because especially places like Great Britain and the EU, their citizens are highly overtaxed.
And also what a lot of people don't understand, I think, at least in Mexico, and don't see it as much as we see it here, is that Canada right now is also dealing with huge levels of corruption. It's just better hidden. So I think that by trying to bring everything back out into the open, as is happening in the US, and talking about the problems and facing them kind of more head on rather than in the background, both for Mexico and Canada, that would be just an overall benefit.
The biggest scam in Canada was the Green New Scam, or the Green New Deal. It was a way of Canada de-investing in oil, which is the only thing that really floats that country economically. Without oil, they don't have much. They would be an impoverished country. But he was trying to de-invest in oil, so Trudeau didn't fund 3 pipelines, which these 3 pipelines were supposed to allow Canada to sell their oil to other markets other than the U.S. Because right now the U.S. is the exclusive market to Canada, and Canada is forced to sell their oil below market value to the U.S. So this is really making Canada wake up with this tariff scare that they need to build these pipelines and they need to have other people to sell their oil to, not because they don't like the U.S., but in case something happens with the tariff or anything else. So it's really strengthening Canada overall, this tariff threat. I'm really glad Trump didn't go through with it, but we need to talk about the next thing.
Well, but I was also, I don't know what the next thing
is. Tariffs again. More tariffs.
Okay, yeah. But I was going to quickly say back to Trudeau and what he's doing and why the tariffs have now been paused with the U.S., is that there's someone else waiting in the wings that is way more popular. It's losing a little bit of popularity right now when Trudeau's making moves. But Pierre Poilievre, who is the leader of the Conservative Party in Canada, he has kind of more of an alignment with these ideas and these new concepts, basically, that Trump is trying to bring in. However, right now, if Trudeau actually listens to Trump and actually does freeze Parliament for that, that means that that's his end. That's the end of Trudeau, because everybody will vote him out because of the non-confidence vote that everybody's been waiting to do. However, if he manages to edge the Liberals a bit further in the poll numbers and a bit higher, then he might be able to even unfreeze Parliament and do what Trump is asking for, and then secure who knows how many more years of him as Prime Minister.
Trump's forcing these Liberals, whether it's Sheinbaum or Trudeau, to become a lot more moderate and pushing them much towards the conservative side, which these moderate policies are what the voters want. So it ultimately is making these Liberals look a whole lot less crazy, and it's making them more attractive to the voters. Trudeau will most likely still lose his election, but he may win more seats now. And as far as Sheinbaum goes, it's a long way off to her next election. And if she makes the conservative turn or changes a lot of her policies to conservative policies,
or more moderate, because she'll never go.
It's going to be she may be very hard to beat, or her party may be very hard to beat, because the biggest hit against her party was hugs, not bullets. And if Trump actually tries to clean the situation that's going on in Mexico down here, and Sheinbaum gets credit for it, she's going to be very hard to beat in the next election.
Yeah, I guess. Or she might become persona non grata for those people that they're trying to, wipe away.
Well, we also need to talk about the EU, because Trump has now set the example with the two biggest allies of the U.S. And if he's willing to play tariff chicken with Canada and Mexico and he got major concessions, he's going to want even bigger concessions out of the EU. Trump doesn't particularly like the EU. The EU, he views the EU as the main source of usury to the U.S. And it's an ocean away. They supply the EU with their military and everything else. He's talked many times that they need to start paying their fair share, not just in NATO, but on a lot of other levels. So when he goes over there with tariff threats, he's going to be threatening the EU. He's going to be threatening individual countries. He's going to be threatening NATO. And each of those are going to be different trade negotiations, and he's going to want major concessions, not minor concessions out of all of these countries. And it should strengthen these countries overall because it's going to force them to potentially build their own militaries and things like this, or really invest in a military infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be a lot of trade negotiations going on in the EU. And I honestly think the EU may get cut up between Russia, China, and the US. Russia is going to be a big player in trade negotiations for the EU because they're already talking about, especially the Eastern Bloc countries, their only way to recover right now will be getting oil from Russia. So they're looking right now at how to lower sanctions on Russia and start getting oil back into these countries for cheap.
And I mean, the reliance that the EU has upon the US is something that it's rarely talked about, but then people complain when the US is asking for, hey, do your part, do what needs to be done also for your own national security, and don't only rely on the US. And I think that that's the main talking point for basically all of the countries that the U.S. is, as they see it, targeting, is more of stop just relying on the U.S. because the U.S. wants to stop relying on the rest of the world as well, because they're kind of building a bit more of a security defense for themselves and trying to, again, bring back manufacturing in case something happens between the two poles that right now are trying to pull the world in several different directions.
You also have China building the Silk Road over to the EU, so everybody really is looking to get a piece of the EU, I think, and the EU is extremely weakened right now. It was I don't know if it was a bad idea, but this idea of creating the EU didn't work out so well. It weakened every individual country and it took their sovereignty away from them and put these unelected officials in charge of their economics, their finances, their military, and a lot of other things. So now the people really feel like their votes don't matter because even if they vote a leader into their country, the EU has more power over their country than their own president or prime minister. Mm-hmm. The EU is also very weakened because how they get a lot of their money is through the U.S. and through NGOs and other international aid and funding from the U.S. And the U.S. is cutting all of this off temporarily. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the other stories we're going to go into today is going to go into that.
Yes.
But Marco Rubio did do an interview on Megyn Kelly, and I think I talked about this last time, but he started talking about a multipolar world, and that's really what you're seeing develop in the mind of the U.S. and in Donald Trump. With the previous leader, Biden, he was really more of a hegemonic figure, and he really was looking to start world wars and get the U.S. back to its greatness through war. Trump, on the other hand, is looking at creating a North American pole and strengthening the allies within that pole, but he's going to have to show them tough love and have them do the right thing, and he's going to do that through trade negotiations. Mm-hmm. Did you want to talk about the, what is this?
USA?
Yeah, USAID.
USAID.
Oh, why don't we talk about the Sovereign Wealth Fund first? So Trump is talking about starting a sovereign wealth fund. A lot of countries already have this, such as Russia, Saudi Arabia, Sweden, places like this. But he wants to create this sovereign wealth fund. And the funny thing about this story is he was talking about starting a sovereign wealth fund and buying TikTok with that sovereign wealth fund. So TikTok's currently unbanned in the US. It's going to be very interesting if he starts a sovereign wealth fund and then buys TikTok. I personally don't think it's a good idea because I don't want to see the government involved in speech on that level. If they're the ones owning and running TikTok, maybe I trust the Trump administration because I'm ideologically aligned with a lot of things that they believe in. But the next administration, I don't want the government having that kind of power. Also, with the sovereign wealth fund, Trump was talking about making more investments in the private economy, kind of corporatizing the U.S. government. So he would buy companies and things like this that would bring a profit into the U.S. government. It'd be another way for the U.S. government to bring funding in other than taxes or tariffs. And I just don't know if I want to see the U.S. corporatized. I do realize that the Chinese government is highly corporatized, and that's the U.S. main competitor. So maybe if they don't corporatize, they're thinking they can't compete. But I think there needs to be major watchdog groups starting up to really watch the government's fingers in all these pies they're going to have, especially in private industry.
Yeah, and especially because it goes against a lot of the conservative principles, you would even call MAGA principles, of not having such a bloated state, not having the executive and all the government essentially be controlling. Doesn't matter if it's as they're doing it now or as maybe they're planning to do. And especially with the TikTok thing and with free speech and with the importance of government not meddling in people speaking to each other and people speaking at the government having essentially the biggest social media that most people use right now, as be it a tool or as a way to surveil, is not a good idea. It's also same as I don't love that Elon Musk is involved both in the government and in X, and that he's also shown tendencies to ban people just because they make fun of him. So being also careful about what they're planning to do now and the ways they're saying and what the reasons are for them to do things. You can't just go, yes, I align completely with one side or with one thing. It's always about questioning what the plan is now and why they're doing the things they're doing, because it can get into a slippery slope real quick.
And this is not just the U.S. government going and trying to corporatize themselves like the Chinese government has, but it's going directly into corporatized warfare, saying that they're going to use this wealth fund to buy TikTok. TikTok was owned by another government, and they threatened to outlaw or ban it. So now they threatened to outlaw or ban it, said, no, you can stick around a little while until we negotiate a deal to buy it off of you. Mm-hmm. That's basically I would consider that to be a hostile takeover by the U.S. government. Yeah. And if they're willing to do that, who knows what they're going to use it for? Yeah. So.
And I mean, I hate TikTok. I've done a bunch of videos going against it. But again, if the U.S. does do this, it would be like just leaving it exactly the same, just on the U.S. side now. So that's not convenient either. But
okay, well, let's get into this U.S. aid. And what does the U.S. aid stand for again?
USAID?
Yeah.
United States. Did you write it down? It's the main point is a lot of people think that USAID is about giving aid to other countries, but it's the United States
Agency for
International Development.
So Agency for International Development. Sorry, we're talking over each other.
So it is about the U.S. kind of giving out money for development specifically. It's not aid as in, we're going to go help the starving children in Africa, which is, I think, what a lot of people kind of view it as. But no, they're funding and using it to kind of wokeify the world.
Transgendered story hour in Chile and places like this is what they're doing with it.
1.5 million to advance DEI in Serbia's workplaces, 70,000 for a production of a DEI musical in Ireland. 47,000 for a transgender opera in Colombia, 32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru, and the list keeps going on and on. Caroline Levitt, who is spokesperson right now for the Trump administration, came out and kind of read the list out, and the list are published now everywhere on X if you want to go find them. But everything that the U.S. was funding that makes no sense other than to, as I've mentioned it a billion times before, propagate the progressive ideology all throughout the world, essentially.
Okay, we do need to talk a little bit about this story because it's not as clear-cut as maybe we've made it seem. This was a very confusing story, and there's a lot of conflicting parts of the story coming out. Number one, they said Musk came out and said he was going to close the USAID department.
USAID department.
What actually ended up happening is they shut down the head office of the USAID department. So what looks like is actually happening, from what I understand, is they shut down the head office and they're going to absorb it into the federal government. So it will still be around, but maybe a little bit smaller. But the federal government's going to have much more oversight and control over what kind of money is going what and where. But it's not exactly clear if it's going to get smaller or how much smaller. Only the head office has been shut down at this time. Mm-hmm. So also the U.S. aid has called this the heads of that department have called this a coup. They can complain all they want, but the writing's all over the wall and in the accounting books on who they've been funding and why they've been funding it. And Trump's going public with all this, so he's going to have no trouble getting the general public on his side. I know the next story we're going to talk about in a minute it's pretty shocking. More people aren't standing up against it, but I can understand why they're not. But before we go to that story, do you have anything else on this?
Well, it just goes further to prove. And for example, a few days ago even, there were documents coming out about how through USAID, the Lutheran Church in the States was receiving funding to kind of propagate the entering of illegal migrants into the U.S., so alien aliens into the U.S. So it's one of those organizations that is able to reach through to everything and everywhere. And because so many agencies in the U.S., which is what a lot of people I think don't understand about what Trump is trying to do, because so many agencies have been captured by ideological activists.
There's no oversight.
There's no oversight. So they've been allowed to go throughout the world spreading whatever they want. Same thing has happened with a lot of NGOs. And people don't believe it, but when they start seeing and then when they start actually looking into where the money's going, especially taxpayer money, people that pay taxes, which Trump kind of wants to change now. But where that money's going, instead of improving, number one, their own country, but number two things that are actually at least worth it, I think it's waking up a lot of people, and the ones that are still supporting these archaic and captured institutions the number's going to keep going down. And I think other countries have to start looking at where their taxpayer money is going and what they're funding with that money.
Yeah, it looks like Trump's turning off the spigots to all funding, and they're trying to evaluate and figure out where the corruption's at or where they can cut costs. So he's got a lot of policies that complement one another and a lot of executive orders which complement one another. And he's trying to turn that from that into legislation. So what kind of complemented this was Rubio put a pause for 90 days on all outgoing funding for all aid worldwide, except for Israel and Egypt. And now it was a little unclear about Ukraine because it seems like there is some war funding going into Ukraine, but it's a little unclear. But all major funding is all major aid from the U.S. has stopped for 90 days while they review it, which is good to hear because a lot of these things do need to be reviewed.
And now he has declared himself the head of USAID until they figure out what's going on. Marco Rubio.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So Rubio has been a surprise because Rubio used to be a rhino. If you don't know what a rhino is, that's a Republican in name only. He was not a populist. He was not on the Trump agenda, but he's seen which way the winds were blowing, and he's gone hard MAGA. And so a lot of liberals and a lot of traditional conservatives look at him as an acceptable figure, but he's pushing through MAGA policies, and he's able to push them through a lot easier than a lot of other people would because he does have a trust of a lot of liberals and traditional conservatives. But the next story was a little bit interesting, and I was a little surprised when I heard it. I was really glad because if people don't know, the education system in the United States is completely captured and corrupt. This story is Trump prepares order to dismantle the Department of Education. It does need congressional approval in order to get this through, but this is really good to hear because this is going to be major reforms in the education sector. And this means this is at the front of the books, and they're really thinking how they can reform it. They do have a lot of advisors and people in the administration or have the ear of the administration that education is their number one priority. One of those people I think is it Pam Bondi?
Pam Bondi.
Pam Bondi and Jordan Peterson. Yeah, it is. Jordan Peterson is very interested in the education system and how it needs to be reformed. He's seen it firsthand in Canada. He's now a resident of the United States, and he has the ear of the Trump administration. So I hope they use him as an advisor.
And that they use a lot of these college professors that were ousted during the wokeification of college and universities and schools, because the ideas they have on how to reform school and school choice and not having to send your kid just to the first school that's near your neighborhood, and using maybe even money and aid that would usually go to specific schools or specific districts that lobby for it, for that to go to parents who want to homeschool, for example, or parents that want to take that and go to a private institution that aligns better with their values. The problem with the education system in the United States, and I mean, Canada is essentially just broken now, is number one, all of their metrics are completely off with the rest of the world. I think even Mexico is doing a bit better than the Canada, at least in certain topics. But the education system has been left so far behind and has been, again, captured by ideology for so long now that reading, writing, math, the basics are no longer even, they don't even have standards anymore for them, because that is not inclusive, to say it one way, because I can't say the R word or the other words, but they want to make everybody stand out and be good, but not actually teach anything. And what they do teach is completely ideologically captured. Even during math questions, they have to be racialized. They have to include people of diverse backgrounds, and just regular questions. And even in literature, the things that they're being taught are not what most people still think of school as.
Well, it looks like hopefully a lot of this stuff is going to start coming to an end, because like I said, with the last policies, with defunding a lot of these government agencies, a lot of Trump's executive orders are all linked together, and they go to support legislation that are coming forth. He put an executive order that complements this particular executive order, which said any universities or colleges that have implement DEI policies will not receive federal funding. If they do not receive federal funding, then will not be able to survive. So they're going to have to end these DEI policies, which it was a great foundational thing to start with. Mm-hmm. And now he's trying to defund the Department of Education, which is going to put another layer on that. And it seems like they're just building layer upon layer, which all support one another.
And I think a lot of people get panicky about, they want to defund education. How can this be? They want everybody to be stupid. But that is because most people aren't aware of what the current state of the education system in the US or even Canada is, especially being in Mexico and being from Mexico, and right now living in Mexico again, seeing the opinions of a lot of people, especially very smart people, that believe that those educational systems are the goal and are the best, but having gone in and seen what they're actually teaching and what the outcomes of the children, what they actually are, I mean, it is one of the reasons why we decided to move back. Eventually, I mean, I didn't want to build a life over there with the type of ideology and how broken down all of these public institutions have been.
Well, he's more trying to, I see it as he's trying to reform the education as an institution overall. Mm-hmm. Sometimes there's multiple departments within the education sphere. So there's the board of teachers and things like this. And so he's going to have to defund some of these and really revamp them in order to fix the education system within the United States.
And because they depend and they work a lot on unions, so the teachers' unions and the this union and the that union, and those are the ones that kind of see for themselves first, and they want to get all of the aid and all of the funding and all of the et cetera to keep implementing all of the activism and all of the ideology that they've been able to inject into it. So just by firing certain people, it wouldn't be enough. It has to be reformed from the core, because it has been rotting to the core for a very long time now.
They don't want the United States to become Canada. Canadian educational institutions are indoctrination centers.
Yeah.
And the United States, a large portion of theirs are as well. If they keep going and keep funding this, they're going to become even worse. So right now, if he's able to reform it or at least stand up and defund some of this, they can stop the bleeding.
Yeah. And Well, it's just happened. It's been allowed to happen this way. A lot of people don't understand how did this ever happen. It started in the colleges with more and more liberal and progressive professors being allowed in while kicking out the conservative ones. Then the students started to adopt this ideology and defend it and become activists themselves. And then they enter into the education system because the education departments were the ones that allowed the most activists in. And then those people become teachers, and then they get better positions.
We have videos about it. It's extremely long and complex. How this happened is extremely long and complex.
Yes.
And we could really go on into this for hours, but we'll keep going so we can actually end the stream at some point.
Yeah.
But we'll go next to Tulsi Gabbard, because Tulsi Gabbard's actually getting really close to getting enough votes to get confirmed. Now, other than Tulsi Gabbard, you got Kash Patel and RFK. These Kash Patel is supposed to be the head of the FBI, RFK the head of the CDC, and Tulsi Gabbard is head of intelligence. Now, Kash Patel and RFK, they're kind of in limbo. We don't know if they're going to get enough votes, but all three of these people are important. Kash Patel and RFK are a little bit more important than Tulsi Gabbard, but to hear that Tulsi Gabbard is getting really close to getting confirmed. She has to get through 2 confirmation hearings. She has to get through the regular confirmation hearing and then the intelligence confirmation hearing. And she's only 1 vote away from getting the votes that she needs. Supposedly, a couple of senators came out and said that they're going to throw their support behind her. That's really good to hear. But as far as Kash Patel goes, him and RFK both had their Senate hearings where they basically got interrogated. And these were some of the most watched confirmation hearings ever put forth by the U.S. government. So they have major support behind them. And the Democrats didn't do themselves any favors. The kind of questions they were asking them showed how out of touch the Democratic Party is with the voters. They don't realize that that vaccinations and that big pharma is not looked on very well from the mainstream public in the United States. And as Kash Patel put it, the FBI has been completely corrupted and weaponized. They don't seem to see it that way. They just kept wanting to ask them questions about January 6th. The U.S. public already voted on about January 6th, and they voted Trump in. So that shows they don't really care about it. So I'm really, really hoping if Kash Patel and RFK can get in there, these are going to be major, major, major changes for the United States. This is really a come to Jesus moment with Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, and RFK. Why? Because all 3 of these people were attacked by the specific departments they are now being proposed to head. Kash Patel was attacked by the FBI, and
what do you mean attacked by the FBI?
They waged multi-million-dollar warfare upon him for charges that were completely trumped up because he's the one that originally exposed the Russiagate hoax on Donald Trump. And in retribution, they wanted to bankrupt him. And try to put him in jail, and it didn't work out for them. So the fact that he's being put up for FBI director, he's going to have access to all FBI secret documents if he gets that position, and they're going to really start declassifying a lot of things and really coming clean to the general public about how corrupt the U.S. government has been over the last few decades.
And that's why they're so scared to follow through on these confirmations, because the way they see it is that these are retaliatory measures, and they're just going to go in and try to completely destroy the agencies that went against them. But, I mean, exactly.
This will be the biggest reform of the U.S. government in history if all 3 of these people get in. Even if just 2 get in, it's going to mean major reforms. RFK has gone against the CDC and specifically Anthony Fauci. He wrote a book. Yeah. What was the name of the book?
The real Anthony Fauci?
Yeah, the real Anthony Fauci. He's spoken up against vaccines. Not that he's against vaccines, shots, but he's against how they redefined what the new mRNA shot was. So if he's able to get into the CDC, again, he's going to have access to all kinds of secret documents, and he's going to be able to declassify this, especially because he has the support of Trump, the FBI, and the intelligence agency through Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard was also attacked by the intelligence agency. She's been she's a 20-year veteran and officer in the military and has had top secret clearance for decades, yet they tried to smear her as a Russian agent. She would never be able to get top top secret clearance if she was a Russian agent, number one. But number two, they put her on a terrorist watch list.
Recently, too.
Recently, yeah. And I think that was why she wasn't able to come to Mexico for the last CPAC.
Yeah.
But...
no, she came. Carrie Lake didn't come.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, she did. Yes. So she was able to get on there.
But she was detained after, as she was arriving back into the U.S., she was detained because they had put her on this watch list where they had to kind of detain her in a room for who knows how many hours. And, I mean, what's curious about this is that, I mean, RFK Jr. is a legacy of the Democratic Party. And then Tulsi Gabbard also came from the Democratic Party. So the fact that now they're in these positions kind of back to kind of where they were and seeing from the other side these attacks, all of these secret documents and files and things that they could eventually expose, well, of course, they're going to have some sort of motivation behind them because of where they're coming from and what that party did to them as well.
Well, and RFK and Kash Patel are both trained lawyers, so they know exactly where to look and how to expose this stuff when they do get in, which is going to be very hopeful. The last story we had today was Rupert Murdoch is a media mogul and the owner of Fox News, and Larry Ellison is the chief technology officer at Oracle. And they were both in the Oval Office today during a media scrum while Trump was talking to the media. And he pointed both of them out and heaped praise on both of them. The reason this is interesting is because Trump has managed to get new tech in line with Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, the owner of Amazon, Jeff Bezos, and all those are the younger tech CEOs. Rupert Murdoch and Larry Ellison really represent the old guard, which shows he's now trying to get the old media and old tech in line. So he's getting he's garnering support and realigning the entire corporate America into this conservative government, which is very hopeful because on his first term, everybody was against him, and that's why he couldn't get anything done. So if he's able to realign these major industries, it's going to be very interesting. And maybe on that note, we can talk about Selena Gomez. And you're saying why? Because Selena Gomez is a very interesting case. She came out with the crying video. Everybody ridiculed her about it. And now all of Hollywood is scared to speak out on a lot of political issues. And a lot of their agencies are telling movie stars and people within the WME agency and other agencies not to speak up against this administration and not to make political statements.
Well, I think it's more don't make political statements because right now the climate is so divided. And number two, I mean, Trump also won the popular vote. We did see some statements during the Grammys last night. I was just going quickly through.
Oh, you're gonna see them because
what happened there. But what is, I mean, obvious is that with people like Selena Gomez and etc., of course, that the sentiment of the general public will not be what they thought it was because they lived in. Liberals and progressives and very woke people live in such a bubble where they don't see and haven't been even able to see the opinions of the real people that are out there because of all the censorship that had been done by all of these tech moguls and CEOs who are now kind of aligning back with what's better for them. So they're also going to start seeing, and everybody's going to start seeing what normal, regular people out there think on social media because they won't be as censored as they once were.
Yeah, well, you're seeing these sacrificial lambs come forward in Hollywood, and it's kind of glorious to see. The one was Selena Gomez, but before her, there was George Clooney and Julia Roberts. They both came out with hard political statements, and they doubled and tripled down on them, and I don't expect their careers to recover anytime soon. But other than those two, Which is
a shame.
There's also been the guy, I don't think it's a shame.
I mean, I like them.
I used to like them.
As actors, yes.
But also Luke Skywalker, what's his name? Anyway, the Luke Skywalker guy is. It's not very important because he's not very important himself.
That's going to bug me because I don't know his name.
But all these people are coming out with hard political statements. So, and they're all being canceled. So I'm going to be very interested to watch the Oscars this year and to see who says what, because I don't think the general public is going to be that forgiving. And Hollywood is already taking a big hit, and so are these studios with any other movies that have a lot of political undertones to them. And they're trying to really, I think, rewrite and re-edit these movies to get these political undertones out of them, but it's very hard to do. And a lot of movies are funded a year in advance, 2 years in advance. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of woke content that hasn't been released yet. These studios are scared to release, but they've invested hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars in this content.
And it's already been like recorded, produced, it's cut, everything, it's ready to go. But now they don't know what to do with it because nobody's going to watch it and they're going to make fun of it. And with the Oscars specifically, going back to what I started with, but in Spanish, with the Oscars now, it is going to be incredibly interesting to see what happens with the nominations of Emilia Perez, what happens with Carlos.
13 nominations, the most nominated movie in history.
So it rivals only...
It's Gone with the Wind.
Yeah. But so it is going to be very interesting when they get up there and accept their awards. Are people finally going to speak out against it? Also, a lot of people don't know, and I'm planning to make a video about it closer to the Oscars date in Spanish, about the parameters that the Oscars have to even include, like to even consider movies, because you send the movie out for consideration of the Academy to get a nomination. But to even do that, you have to tick so many boxes, including how many women worked on your set.
Yeah, so you had to hit DEI. You had to hit DEI quotas,
Yes.
not just on camera but off camera. So the cameramen, the grips, the lighting, they had to meet 50% DEI inclusion rates, which
and we saw that.
which is insane because the general public of the United States and Canada isn't 50% diverse.
Yeah.
But
they were not going by the actual percentages of LGBTQ people and people of color, etc. They were saying, no, it has to be 50
they were trying to overrepresent certain groups.
Yes. And I mean, we saw it while we were there.
Yeah.
Within the industry. I don't even know what camera I'm on. There we go.
Let's go back to the two shot, maybe close it out.
Sure. So, we actually did an hour and 1 minute. So we're getting back into streaming. As I mentioned, I want to start doing at least 15 minutes in Spanish at the beginning. So if you speak Spanish, great. And then you want to stay for the English one. But I do think it's also important to speak to our only Spanish-speaking audience. And Guy will eventually maybe speak Spanish.
And I built this new set for us, so everything's going well.
You redid a bunch of the things. If you see some changes in the background, that's why. We will always kind of keep trying different things. Let us know what you think as well, please. We always love to read your comments.
And I think that's it for today.
Yes, so we hope you have a lovely rest of your day. There will be a new video in Spanish tomorrow about this whole mess with the tariffs.
Adios.
See you there.